So over the last couple of days, there's been this growing, increasing level of, I would just say, environment that it kind of just seeps its way into YouTube, where you look at the aspect to what's been going on with Wilder versus Fury. And ultimately, it just comes down to two sides that are just not on the same page about something that they originally agreed to. And when I make my videos talking about the situations and how it unfolds, I'm making these videos with the clear expectation that this situation can go in either direction. You either have a situation where a arbitrator rules in the side of Wilder, saying that there are not grounds for what would be considered to be a natural disaster that allows Tyson Fury to step away from the fight, or you can have an arbitrator rule inside of Fury, in which you have a situation which this natural disaster does allow Fury to step away from the fight. But ultimately, when people come out of left field and they say, well, there's not going to be a third fight, the problem with you making that statement is it's already contractually there that they have already agreed to a third fight, because that's how they got the second fight. And that's irrefutable. Now, with the third fight, it's all just contingent on whether or not you feel that COVID and coronavirus and what it's done to the economy of boxing and how fights are staged, is that a legitimate reason for both these sides to step away from the situation, given that there will be not necessarily an opportunity for them to map out dollars. And there are statements that go around in boxing media that tends to be a lot of the time misinformation. Now, I'm not going to use the area of expertise from Eddie Hearn speaking on a situation that he has nothing to do with, because Eddie Hearn has nothing to do with this situation. And when Bob Arum, who seems to be in a very comfortable position because he is aware of a couple of different things. Number one, this decision doesn't matter to him, and he's given that vibe. And the idea that he is working his hardest not to get this fight, I feel like it's a little overblown. Bob Arum doesn't care about a third fight. And the reason why Bob Arum doesn't care about a third fight is because the second fight took place in the US. And if an arbitrator rules in the side of Fury, which will force every single state commission that sanctions boxing fights to abide by that ruling, it still doesn't affect an international fight with Joshua versus Fury. And that's why Bob Arum doesn't really care about this situation. And for Shelly Finkel and Deontay Wilder, they are approaching this because they know that a ruling in Wilder's favor means that Tyson Fury would not be able to fight Anthony Joshua inside of the United States. Now, whether this happens in another venue around the world is something completely different. And at the same time, it makes sense for those guys to fight outside of the US, given the fact that they're two British fighters. Also, at the same time, you have to also look into the fact that coronavirus is also doing mayhem type numbers outside of the US just as much as it's doing inside the US. So whether we get this fight is just going to be contingent upon how these sides kind of figure things out economically. But the idea that there won't be a third fight because one guy's allowed to do something that the other guy's allowed to do something, and the idea that the third fight will happen because one guy decides to do something and the other guy decides to do something else. Those 2 points tend to be really, really unparalleled to each other. This will be determinant on if Joshua versus Fury has a market for them to fight, and if that market's going to be available to them. And at the same time, it's also going to look into the fact that ESPN is an American company, and Tyson Fury had signed on to fight fights in the US. And if an arbitrator rules in Wilder's favor, Tyson Fury will not be able to fight anybody else in the US unless it's Deontay Wilder. Those are things that you can't refute. And whether or not you agree with the ruling, you don't agree with the ruling has to serve a purpose in terms of fulfilling a contract or not fulfilling it. And that's what it comes down to.